So Jamaica's first major effort at constitutional reform since we passed the Charter of Rights in 2011. The opposition has said Jamaica needs to remove the Privy Council as our final court of appeal. At the same time, we remove Charles Philip Arthur George Mountbatten Windsor, otherwise known as King Charles III, King of Jamaica, as our head of state. The opposition says it can't support one without the other. Now, we know the opposition, PNP, wants us to remove the Privy Council and replace it with the Caribbean Court of Justice, the CCJ. In the past, the JLP hasn't supported that position. We're waiting to hear the position of the current administration on that. And in this section of the program, we're going to be asking then, where are we now and what are our options? Joining us in studio to have that discussion, we're going to be hearing from Legal and Constitutional Affairs Minister Marlene Malahoo Forte. She co-chairs a Constitutional Reform Committee. Also, we'll be hearing from PNP representative on the committee and opposition spokesperson on justice, Senator Donna Scott Motley, the chair of the Jamaica Umbrella Group of Churches, and committee member Dr. Elaine McCarthy with us as well as Executive Director of Jamaicans for Justice, Michael Jackson. Before all of that, though, the leader of the opposition, Mark Golding, spoke at a press briefing yesterday, and earlier today, Prime Minister Andrew Holness spoke at the post-cabinet press briefing. Here are some excerpts from what both men had to say.
In my view, the entire reform process has been flawed. It should have been preceded by intense public education on the existing constitution so that the people of Jamaica would have been informed as to what now exists and where the changes ought to come. The reform process should have been genuinely open to a fresh look at the kind of constitution that Jamaicans want to have in the 21st century, rather than limiting ourselves to positions that were agreed some 30 years ago in the 1990s.
It is not so long ago that Jamaica entered into celebrations for its 60th year of independence. Coming out of this, there were many calls for Jamaica to proceed on the path of becoming a republic. Calls made by prominent members of the opposition as well as other prominent members of the society. As Prime Minister, at the time of Jamaica's celebration of its 60th year, it found favor with my own thinking that this should be the case. We contemplated the work that was already undertaken some 25 or 26 years ago, very detailed, extensive work, but by the passage of time, dated. There might be a different point of view, a different perspective with the current generations. And therefore, we thought it best to put in place a review committee. We named the committee.
From the outset, back in June or July of 2022, before any Constitutional Reform Committee was appointed, I wrote to the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs to make it clear to the government that for us in the People's National Party, final and full decolonization is a fundamental issue of access to justice for the Jamaican people and of national sovereignty. I have been open and consistent on this position throughout the process since then. Indeed, it is not a Mark Golding position. It is a position of the People's National Party, and we have been consistently trying to move Jamaica in this direction for decades, as you know. Our position is that time come to leave the British monarchy in full, once and for all. When Jamaica is moving out of the King's Yard, we cannot have 1 foot in and 1 foot out of the yard. That would leave us neither fish nor fowl in another man's yard. That can't work. We will not support a phased approach to dealing with the matter of full decolonization, because the phased approach does not guarantee its attainment. it may never happen if we do it that way.
We ended up having a meeting under the auspices of the Vale Royal talks. I thought those were good meetings, and we came to an understanding that the process would be a phased process, that we would move on the matters on which we agreed, which would be the Jamaica becoming a republic, and the other matters that were a little bit more complex, on which consensus ought to be fully realized, that those would come in the second phase of the process. As a result of that meeting, that is the Vale Royal talks, the leader of the opposition agreed to name members to the CRC. And as a result of that, we moved forward with the review. So we had I would say, reasonable expectation that we are proceeding in good faith.
The government is now seeking to shift blame to us as the opposition for the government's failure to engage authentically with the opposition to identify a common pathway forward. The public should not be hoodwinked by what is being said in the media today. We have been responsible. We have sought to participate genuinely in the process. We have very real concerns about some of the contents of the report, and we have a fundamental issue, which is at the core of our party's philosophy, which needs to be addressed, and we need to hear from the Prime Minister if we're to move forward together. As I have said, this matter will govern generations to come, and we must allow and follow our conscience and do what we believe to be right by the Jamaican people.
My initial assessment of the response of the opposition is that I am disappointed, but I am not surprised. I am not surprised that they would have tried to find every way out of seeing this process through to its rightful conclusion. I would like to say to the Jamaican people that the efforts that the government has made is not in vain, that we will continue to pursue consensus, because the truth is that you cannot disturb the constitutional and governance architecture of the country without consensus. That is the reality. And consensus takes time, and it takes effort. So I speak to you today as Prime Minister of the country, not as leader of a political party seeking power, but as someone who is genuinely interested in the advance of our country. And so I want to assure Jamaicans that the process continues. We are in a certain season described by others as silly. I tend to sometimes agree. But we will get over it, and Jamaica will evolve into its rightful form, constitutionally, governance, in terms of our economic independence and socially. The journey continues.
Okay, so where are we, as I was asking, and what are our options? Thanks everybody for coming in. I'm going to actually start with Dr. Elaine McCarthy, who I don't think we've heard from at all throughout this discussion. As I said, you represent the Jamaica umbrella groups of churches on the committee, and for clarity, you signed the report that came from the Constitutional Reform Committee on behalf of the groups you represent, correct?
That's correct.
Tell us why.
All right, we have gone through a process where we have looked at various issues relating to the whole constitutional reform, and in the whole deliberation, the various issues that we have signed off on, it was done on a consensual basis. So everybody basically, at the end of the day, agreed to that particular point or points that were signed off on. So it wasn't a situation where you had persons opposing and those agreeing, and then it is, signed off on. No, consensus was reached. So that has been the mode of operation for the whole deliberation leading up to the drafting of the report.
Are you disappointed that the opposition isn't signing?
I was hoping that that would have happened because the points or the information that is stated there in the report, all of those matters were matters that they also agreed on. But I guess it's just that issue about the final court too that has caused some delay in the signing. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Well, want to follow up on that with Senator and with the other guests, but we're just about at the break. So let's go to the break. We'll come back in just a moment.